Protestant mother. So as you might imagine, he had a hard time growing up deciding which side he could choose. So he went to high school at a place where he didn't have to choose, a non-denominational high school where he found freedom and where he found a deep life in Christ. You see, a revival was breaking out at that non-denominational high school that Paul attended. Hey, this is Dave Wainscott for KRDU1130.com before they were saints. One more story today about Paul, because just as Paul was finding freedom in that revival, so were many other students and faculty coming to the Lord, including Paul's girlfriend Allison, whom he later married, including a student named Larry, who one day, without necessarily expecting much, tacked up a notice on the bulletin board of that high school saying, "Hey, I'm going to start a band. Anyone interested? Call me." Paul called, a couple other friends called, and they formed a band, these boys. The band at first and for a little while was called Feedback. They joked as that was the predominant sound coming out. They changed their name to The Hype and admitted they barely knew how to play their instruments, but they had a sense they would gel and maybe even someday become big. Paul and his band. Well, there's a lot to celebrate when people come to Christ, and one of the best things that happen is you get grounded in a local church. And so Paul, his bandmates, began becoming involved in a local church that surrounded them with worship, with fellowship and encouragement and support, but not support in one area. In fact, right at the core of their calling, the band felt a blow when the church leadership said, "You're probably going to have to choose between Jesus and rock music." They didn't feel they were called to make that decision. They felt they could follow Jesus and follow their calling to be in a rock band. They saw no contradiction, and they made up their mind after prayerful, agonizing thought to continue with the band. You know, sometimes a band says things that sound pretty arrogant, like, "We're going to be the biggest band in the world." You know, and once in a while, that band is right. The band that Paul and his friends started eventually became known as U2. Have you heard of U2? Have you heard of the lead singer Paul Hewson, whom, as you might have guessed by now, is more commonly known by, and you know him by, his teenage nickname of Bono. That was Bono's story about before he was a saint. There's a lot to celebrate when you start hearing and telling these stories, so we're just glad for this outlet on KRDU. If that was new news for you to hear about Bono of U2, who's a world changer these days, if that was new news for you to hear that he was a believer in Jesus, here's a great place to start. Right here on the KRDU 1130 website, you can see an interview that our own Celtic Ken did with Beth Maynard. She co-authored a book, co-edited a book called Get Up Off Your Knees, Preaching the U2 Catalog. You can hear that wonderful interview that Ken had with Beth. You can also find Beth at u2sermons.blogspot.com. We encourage you to check it out. Until next time, remember, there's a lot to celebrate when we tell stories, and remember, before we were saints.